Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. Today, we are talking about how to speak up and be heard in meetings because we know as ambitious leaders in management roles that you've got lots to share and lots of ideas to contribute. But even in a leadership position, sometimes it can be really difficult or it can feel really difficult to have your voice heard and appreciated. So today we are going to discuss some strategies to help you ensure your contributions are heard and carry the weight that they deserve. So let's get straight into it as we always do. And Jackie, why is it important to speak up and be heard in meetings?
So I think a big part of it is exactly what you've just identified, that there are just too many people out there who have great ideas, who have lots that they can contribute. And it feels really frustrating if you're in that situation where you might know that you've got loads that you can contribute, but you don't feel that's being taken on board. And I have that conversation a lot with people that are in that situation that are finding it frustrating to influence either peers, key stakeholders, influence the exec or the leadership team. So I think there's that side of it, of the importance of not doing yourself a disservice by finding ways to make sure that your contribution does have the impact that you intend it to. But also, I think as a leader, there's a responsibility that comes with that to be active rather than passive. So often when I'm working with clients around this type of subject, there's the sense of frustration of they won't listen to me, I'm not being listened to. And I think it's really important to recognize and take responsibility for trying to find the ways that can work for you, for the situation that you're in order to have that impact and to have that contribution recognized, valued, and appreciated. So it's not just that it does good for you, but actually for me, as part of a leadership role, you have that responsibility within relationships to try and find the strategies and not just blame the people who aren't listening or the people who aren't valuing your contribution.
Yeah, and I think with that as well, it is something that you really do need to practice as well. It's not just something that you just rock up at a meeting and all of a sudden people will start listening to what you've got to say if it hasn't happened in the past. So I suppose the next thing is, why is it hard? Like, why do people find it hard?
And I think this is a really important question for people to ask themselves about their own situation. So if you're listening to this and you identify that there is that frustration, that you're not currently being listened to or not being listened to as much as you like, or there might be certain circumstances, I think it's really helpful to reflect on what are the barriers in your particular situation, because there are a whole range and they are so different for individuals. So maybe reflect on, where is this feeling come up and which of these might be contributing for you? And you might recognize several. There might be one where you're like, yes, that's the one. Or it might be something different because we've only got so long to cover. So kicking off then, I think there is often a sense of kind of power dynamics when people are struggling to be heard. Often it's in situations where they might feel intimidated or uncertain, or the situation is new. So if you've just been promoted, which is a lot of my clients, and you're then working in situations with people who are more senior than you've been used to working, then you can feel intimidated. You can worry about showing naivety. You want to prove yourself and you don't want to put a foot wrong. And so you can sometimes hold yourself back or feel like these are the gods who have all the answers, and that illusion can be shattered quite quickly. But there can be that sense of, I don't want to get it wrong. And I don't know whether that's something that you found for yourself, your clients.
Yeah, I think that is the thing, isn't it? When you start a new role, especially when it's a role you've been promoted into, you don't want to get it wrong. And depending on the dynamics in those meetings, it can really either help or hinder how you progress then in that role. Because as soon as you start feeling a little bit down on yourself in one area of your role, it tends to escalate, doesn't it? And it really has an impact on your confidence. And I found that early on in my career. And also, I see that with lots of clients as well, because there's so many people that come to me for job search because there's things going wrong in the role. There's things that have made them lose their confidence. So the first thing they think is, I need to get out of here. I need to get another job, rather than thinking about what can I do to try and resolve this situation or to try and get this confidence back. And then that's where it becomes something that they're like, I need to get away from this. But then what happens then is they go to a new role and it happens again, because they never dealt with it in the first instance. So I suppose if you're listening to this now and you're thinking this is happening for me, rather than running away from the situation or trying to put as much space between you and the situation as you can, it's about unpacking it a little bit and just thinking about, okay, what do I need to do now to work on this? Now, it could be that you're way past it and it is time to move on from that company. Everyone's in a different situation. But if there's any opportunity to learn now, and to think about what can I do in order to start speaking up and be heard, so that when I go into a new role in the future, I've started to build up that confidence and I know exactly how to assert myself in the right way. And it is definitely something I believe that you need to practice consistently.
Absolutely. And as you describe in there, I think there is also that element of, so people hold themselves back because they feel like saying nothing is better than saying the wrong thing. But very often that can then create a perception of you. And that's another area that can have an impact, where you're perceived as being perhaps more junior or unwilling to speak up or unwilling to make a contribution. So I totally understand that tension, but then it does create that lack of confidence, because it's you then staying mute and staying silent at a time where you could ask things and it could be that you've got exactly the perfect contribution that's needed. And in all honesty, yes, you could be getting it wrong. When you're new into something, you might genuinely have some naivety around things. And we'll come on to talking about the strategies, but I think a big part of it there can be actually sometimes just asking questions rather than trying to make points. If you genuinely haven't got that understanding to allow you to make a point, then that's totally fine. Asking questions is still making a contribution, and staying silent and holding yourself back is often the worst thing, both in terms of allowing you to make a contribution, but also in terms of perception and reputation, because then the question starts to be asked and that then feeds into that confidence cycle. So I think another one, and this one I imagine will be a big one for people, so is communication preferences. So what often happens is that within a leadership role, you will have multiple different stakeholders, different situations where you're seeking to have your voice heard. And in different meetings, there will be dynamics of communication based on the preferences and the styles of the people in the room. The one that always gets talked about, or tends to get talked about a lot, I think, is introversion versus extroversion preference. It's broader than that. So you've also got people who are more reflective versus have a more assertive style. You've got people who tend to be quite detail focused versus people who tend to have a real big picture focus. And I think what's really important is you will have your natural preferences, and what often happens is we try and influence and have our voice heard using our own preference, rather than clocking what are the preferences that are going to get our voice heard by other people. Because what people will listen to is the preference that they have, not the preference that you have.
Do you know what? That is a really good point, isn't it? Because when you go into a meeting, and especially when you're new to a role, or you're fairly new to a role, or you're feeling like you're lacking confidence in some way, the focus is on you, isn't it? And you sit there thinking about you and about how you're going to respond and react and how you're going to get your point across. And all of that time, what you should be doing is really trusting yourself that you'll have the answer, that you'll come in with the point at the right time. but clock in what everyone else is doing and getting an understanding of what their preferences might be, so that when you do respond or react, it's going to hit in the right way. And I think that is absolutely key, isn't it? What you've said there is actually a game changer when you take that focus off you and what you're lacking, and put it onto them and what they need in order to hear your communication in a way that is going to resonate with them. That's the key to it, isn't it?
It really is. And it's so hard to do. And this came up not long ago for a client of mine where they were going into a situation with a senior leadership team. They'd started a new role and they were really thinking about, how do I stay true to me, but successfully influence? And this was a big part of the conversation we were having, was what signs are you seeing about their communication preference? What comes naturally to you that will land with them, and what might you need to put a bit more effort to make sure that you can get the message across in a way that they are going to be prepared to listen. And that gave so much more confidence when she was going into that situation, because she knew that she was ticking their boxes. So it gave her that confidence to approach that situation where the focus was on them and not on her.
Yeah, and I do just think that is really key, to start thinking of it from that perspective. And once you do that, that is where you can start changing. And even if you're still lacking confidence in those meetings, switching that focus will help you to take the action and start to build that confidence. I suppose we've just touched on strategies there, but what are some of the key strategies or the key approaches that you would recommend for people to start thinking about how they can really speak up and have their voice heard?
So there's probably 4 that I've cherry picked that can work, and it's going to depend upon your own circumstances. So thinking about some of the things that we've shared, and there's a whole heap of others that can impact on making it harder. It could be that the meetings are just genuinely badly run. It could be that you struggle more in remote situations versus in person. It could be that you've had feedback before that has made you more hesitant about how you try and speak up. So reflecting on those things and identifying will help people to perhaps pick between, where might you pick? So rather than trying to do all of these, I would say pick out one that feels most pertinent for you. The first is to really think about your preparation for these situations. So as we've talked through those examples of the things that have made it harder, we've given examples of ways. So some of that is about preparation in terms of making sure that you feel well prepared. So if there's stuff to read beforehand, don't be flying through it in the last 5 minutes. Make sure that you schedule time to read and think and prepare in that way. But also it's that reflection on, who are those people that are going to be in the room? What are the styles that are going to allow me to engage and interact in a way? What are the things that they care about? What are the things that are their pet projects, or the things that I've discerned from understanding a bit about them? What are their kind of hot buttons, if you like, for the things that will get them to stand up and listen? So if you know, for example, that somebody is really data driven, then your preparation is going to include thinking about what data might be relevant, how might I communicate in a way that is going to involve that. So the preparation is far more than just making sure that you're arriving on time and have read the pre-work. It's a lot of that thinking about, who are the characters, what are the approaches, what do they respond to, and how can I lean into the things that they respond to.
Yeah, and I think it's perfect. And you'll always get a real mix of people, won't you, in there? I know, thinking back to meetings I used to go to as a senior leader, and some people were super detailed. So they wanted everything, absolutely everything that you could think of. So it was about presenting that in a way that was really concise. That didn't mean that I took up the whole meeting. And also you get those real high level, big chunk people who just want the top level. And it's just really knowing your stakeholders, isn't it? So that you're giving them the information how they want to receive it. And I think if you do that, you'll feel better in yourself. They'll receive it better. And ultimately that's going to build your confidence. So what is the next thing then?
So the next thing for me is really thinking about timing. So this is a bit more if you are in the room and you feel like maybe the meetings aren't particularly well run, if you feel like maybe you go to open your mouth, but someone else has already said the thing that you were going to say, those kinds of situations. This is being, I think, aware of there won't always be a perfect time for you to make your point. And particularly with remote meetings and the number of meetings that are held on Teams or on Zoom, where you're almost waiting because you don't want to talk over somebody, use things like the hand raise function, use the chat for those kinds of things. And if you are in the room, use body language to signal that if you make that physical change where you lean in, where you kind of show, I've got a point to make here, then that makes it easier to break into that conversation. Because I think that's the timing thing is almost, again, it's the active versus passive thing. It's waiting for a perfect time to make your point versus being active about using the timing to make the point at the time that it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's really key, isn't it? And just as you were talking there, I wrote down idea stealer. There's always one, isn't there? There's always one person that, you're ready, you're on the cusp of sharing this really great idea, and then somebody else gets in there first, and you don't know how they did it. They just managed to slip it in, get it in there, and you sit there then kicking yourself, don't you? Because you're like, that was my idea. So I suppose in that situation, what would you advise?
I think this really neatly ties into the third strategy, which is about be comfortable being uncomfortable, because very often when that happens, it's either that you've waited too long and you've not wanted to break into the conversation and you've been really polite and someone else has been willing to go there quicker. And that's why you often kick yourself. But it can also be where you've had conversations outside the room. You might know that other people have that awareness of an idea that was fundamentally yours. And there's nothing more annoying than when you were the one that came up with an idea, you've talked to someone else about it, and then they're the one that presents it and they get all the plaudits. So I think it's about being comfortable with speaking up, even if that doesn't always come naturally. And that's the bit I think that people often need to lean into with this situation, where if you're in a situation where the meeting isn't particularly well run, which so many meetings aren't, where people do tend to kind of jump in and there are characters that will jump in and will say things, sometimes to get your voice heard, you've got to be prepared to behave more in line with what will get your voice heard in that situation. And that is not necessarily what comes naturally to you. So I think you've two options with that. One is to either make your points and be willing to get in there. Another is you can build on that idea. You can say, I agree with that idea. And in addition, these are some ways that we could take that a stage further. So you don't have to just sit in silence because someone else has said the thing that you were thinking. You can acknowledge them, you can build on that idea, even if they have pitched it, even if they did get it from you originally. You never truly know whether somebody has stolen an idea or whether they've come up with it independently, but you do know those characters that can be prone to doing that. And I think you've just got to be prepared to adapt your behavior to the situation. And that can sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable as you practice it because it's new.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? The more you practice being uncomfortable, the more comfortable you're going to get. So I suppose it's very chicken and egg, but it is just all about the practicing. So what is the final thing then?
So the final thing for me is really thinking about where are the ways to build your influence outside of meetings. Again, this comes often from discussions with one-to-one clients where they might struggle in that group situation for a variety of the reasons that we've talked about. And then instead of trying to push straight away, sometimes the answer is to think about how can you build influence outside the room. So this can be, for example, if you know that, again, you've just been promoted, perhaps the perception of you is that you are more junior and therefore people might have a bias that you've got less to contribute. by having some of that opportunity to have conversations outside the room or by following up on things that are said within a meeting, what you can do is build that perception of your credibility and your sense of your experience. So people sometimes feel frustrated that they're not valuing my opinion. And actually, when you reflect, it's that person barely knows you, or that literally barely all they know about you is that you've been promoted and this is your role now. They might not have any clue of your previous career history, of your training, of your experience. And so when you seek to build that understanding for other people of the value you can contribute, it's often easier to do that separately, but it really impacts because you can then have that reputation as someone who does follow up, who has really sound reasoning, who asks really good questions, who has really good experience to bring to bear. And that can then lead to you actually being asked and your voice being heard more within meetings.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is like really sound advice, isn't it? Because it is just about identifying what you need to do, what you need to work on, what you need to practice, and actually putting it into action and almost forcing yourself to take that action because it will build the confidence. So, just to summarize, then, what are your 3 top tips to speak up and be heard in meetings?
So I think the first, which I feel like we say this so often, but the first is start with reflection, understand what are your personal barriers. Is it just that you are working in a situation where people are not prepared to listen and you are never going to be heard and you need to make that change? Or is it that you haven't tried to consider and implement these strategies? So start with the reflection, understand what's really going on and why it's happening. Then really start to think about, from that, what could you do and what could you take ownership of? And the 2 that I would say are really the biggest game changers for clients of mine is thinking about other people and communicating with their preferences in mind rather than with yours. And also that real kind of strategic preparation of thinking about, how do I go into this in a way that I can make the contribution that I want to make? So those would be my top 3, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you for listening this week. And as usual, if you found it useful, please do share with anybody else that you think it might help. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. And if you are looking to develop your skills in these areas, then please do get in touch. And don't forget, we can also help your teams as well. So drop us a message and we will be more than happy to tell you how we can help. And we'll see you next week on the podcast.